Leftover lasagne.
Leftover lasagna.
Lasagna? No way.
It's a type of sandwich.
Some kind of gross pasta.
Leftover
Leftover
lasagna is a
lasagna
podcast hosted by
my
Nitin
church
and Tony Uncle. Leftover lasagna.
Very funny name.
Hello and welcome to Leftover Lasagna, the weekly 10-minute show that has now transformed into a 50-minute podcast. A comfort comestible from Nitin and Tony, who like to think of themselves not as content creationists, but content evolutionists. A show tempered by scientific curiosity and bubbling with silly verbosity. In a world where mad people either take it too easy or too hard, Leftover Lasagna aims to be the lace that lets you leave the labyrinth. That's right, the world is filled with mad people who either needlessly number each of their tweets like Amitabh Bachchan or laissez faire podcasts that refuse to index their episodes and let the characters of chaos sort themselves out. And we are the jam in the donut, the beautiful middle that lets you know exactly which episode number you are on in text and in speech. Welcome to episode 8. This is Tony, and joining me, my friend in first principles, the Prince of Persia, the pal of palatability, the yummiest Nitin Sundar. Say hi.
Hello, Tony. What did you say? We are comestibles. This podcast will self-destruct in 5 seconds because it is also combustible. You bought a lot of interesting analogies in that introduction to Leftover Lasagna. It was amazing, I should say. So since you bought a lot of interesting analogies, I was suddenly reminded of Lusitania. Do you remember what Lusitania is?
Oh, is this from... it's either from PG Woodhouse or Catch 22. I don't know which one it is from.
No, it is from the First World War. Lusitania was this big British cruise liner which was sunk by U-boats, by the German U-boats. So you bought Leftover Lasagna and the German U-boats brought down Lusitania. So we are all like leftover remnants of Lusitania.
But Nitin, what is the one ship that will never sink?
we will put Mustafa idea.
It is our friendship. No, so what I was going with was there's been a lot of feedback that has come our way, and like we love all our listeners, and almost all feedback has been actionable. Right? And, thank you for that. Some of it is not actionable because we don't know what we're doing right, but some of it is very actionable because there are some great tips in there. But there's one feedback which I will ignore outright, which has come to us from one of our listeners who, again, went to college with me. So she said basically that we should stop laughing while we are talking to each other so much. And I'm like, hey, no way. This is the entire point of the podcast, is that Nitin and I get to have fun with each other and you guys get to join. So Nitin,
actually you should have...
This is the ship that will never sink.
You should have corrected her. This is actually the podcast where we talk while we are laughing with each other. So, and we cannot stop doing that.
Superb. Yeah, that is correct. So perfect. Episode 8, which I believe will be titled Ad Hominem. Right? I think so. Why?
You tell us, Tony. What is Ad Hominem?
Now we'll go digging. Yeah. So I think around episode 4 or 5, we had this idea that maybe we should introduce this really fun section that used to exist in the Hindu, which told you about etymology of phrases and stuff like that, right? Or what it didn't have is explanation of either psychological phenomena or fallacies that we talk about frequently, but you just mention it, right, without ever looking at even so much as the Wikipedia entry of it, because you are usually using it in one of those heated WhatsApp debates, right? So we thought maybe by virtue of bringing up one of these every week, we'll at least be forced to read the first line of it, right? So Ad Hominem was one which we thought of a while back. And it was brought to light because of a lovely joke on Twitter, which I'll get to. But what is your take on ad hominem? What is ad hominem?
Ad hominem is, when an argument is directed at a person as opposed to the position that they're maintaining. So you don't, you just hate a person. Let's say I hate, say, Donald Trump, for instance. And I use that as a reason to hate the entire Republican Party. Not because I hate what they stand for or what their policies are, but because I hate the person who is the face of that party. So that is ad hominem. and we will dig
Yeah.
a few deep layers.
Yeah.
Peel the layers.
So
from-
it basically means to the person, right? So you are basically arguing against the person as opposed to the merit of the argument itself. So because let's say Narendra Modi has said it, and I hate Narendra Modi, therefore, like, I will dismiss any position that he says, right? But that's not the correct way to phrase an argument, right? It has to be what the merit of the argument is, irrespective of where that person is from, right? But the reason why we thought of bringing this in was there was a brilliant second layer that came up organically on Twitter. Right? So when people deride things such as puns, it is a lazy sort of generalization. Right? I feel
Yeah.
there are like multiple great layers to what makes a good pun, similar to what makes a good cryptic clue. Right? It can be enjoyable as well. I think the difference is back then, during World War II and so forth, whoever could do good wordplay, they basically sent them to Bletchley Park to crack the Enigma machine, right? Except now everything sort of
Explain
moved.
further. What happened at Bletchley Park?
So Bletchley Park was this whole setup where the German Enigma machine, right? German way of communicating with each other, which was based on an encryption, had to be broken. And if you broke it, you could basically, the Allies could gain the upper hand in war, right?
Yeah.
So it is this is much before computing, and you can't just put brute force or anything like that, right? So who would be the best people to crack the code? So their idea was that anyone who was able to solve the times crossword, which is a cryptic crossword, in I think 10 minutes or less, should apply, right? And basically those were the people that they gathered around, and who successfully actually cracked the Enigma machine and turned the tide of the war itself, right? If you remember. So that was very memorable. But a word on the times crossword itself. Do you know who was the father of the Times crossword, the first person to set the Times crossword?
Mahatma Gandhi. Oh, sorry,
Yeah.
father of different thing.
Oh man, no. The reason I'm asking this, and it actually ties the two together, is that the first compiler of the Times crossword was this person called Adrian Bell. And the fun part is, you know who his daughter is? His daughter is Anthea Bell, who basically translated asterisks into English. Right? Now, the
Oh.
beauty of asterisk translation into English is that the original is obviously not in English, and there are so many wordplays and puns, right? But the physical space allotted to the comic is still the same.
Yeah.
And even if you've read it in English, you'll see how beautifully they've sort of, applied the wordplay. I'm not sure if it's translated or not, but there's a difference between just translating word for word and like being able to produce the same quality, right? So you see how wordplay has sort of translated from the creator of the Times crossword onto Anthea Bill and has given joy for generations, right?
Yeah, goes back to Lusitania, which is where we started, since we're talking about world wars and all that. But imagine, finally, wordplay enthusiasts were actually considered important and good at something. Like, that must have been such a watershed moment for wordplay enthusiasts around the world. But eventually,
Absolutely.
the person who cracked those codes was Alan Turing, right? The person who eventually cracked the German codes.
Yeah, I think there was a team, and obviously, like, they had a machine and everything. But the team was basically composed of these people who were able to solve cryptic crosswords in X amount of time, right? So,
amazing.
Actually, I would love to have been born at that time, because, and I think we'll speak about this later in the episode. For the longest time, my sort of bio on Instagram was verbal guy stuck in a visual medium, right? The world has gone fully visual now, right? There was a time when it was just like wordplay and thoughts and like what words you wrote as opposed to how you used to look. So that was a good time.
Imagine if Tony had existed back then, he would have been hosting Leftover Lasagna with Alan Turing. I mean, what an upgrade on this podcast.
Are you saying you are Alan Turing?
I'm saying I'm Benedict Cumberbatch, man. Come on.
This is true. This is entirely true. So the reason why I said that there is such a thing as a good pun, and connecting it back to ad hominem, which we spoke about a while back, is this tweet. So this is a tweet from Merriam-Webster dictionary, which basically says what is an imperfect rhyme or an I rhyme, right? Which is like laughter and daughter, which when it is written out seems like they should rhyme, but an I rhyme is basically words which are spelled similarly but pronounced differently, like wind, bind,
Yeah.
cove, dove, come home, symmetry, sky, gone, alone,
Yeah.
etc., etc. Right? And then there's this guy called Jack Metzler who says, uh, wind and wind and bind instead of wind and bind.
Yeah.
Uh, actually rhyme, if you take it as a past tense of watch and the past tense of dive, etc. Right? So,
Yeah.
What's it called when there's an I rhyme that's also an actual rhyme, like dive and live, right? As
Yeah.
opposed to dive,
Dive
and
and
live.
live.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then Merriam-Webster is put in a spot of bother, and they're like, let's assume for our I rhyme thread, we are talking about the ones that don't rhyme. Right?
Yeah.
And Jack Metzler comes back with a zinger, which is, I apologize. It was an unfair ad hominem attack. Right? And this is a perfect pun. This is like
Yeah, this is beautiful.
absolutely.
It's set up. I wonder if it was, the cynic in me makes me wonder whether Jack Messler and Merriam-Webster actually planned this out and did a collaboration to come up with this thread. You remember that time when the Twitter collabs used to be a thing where two people will have a conversation.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
you think,
Correct.
outrage, what's happening, and all of that. There are 20 threads later, there's like a marketing tagline at the end of it.
What a horrible time.
Thanks to Elon Musk, at least such nonsense doesn't happen on Twitter. I think people have reduced the amount of money they spend doing rubbish stuff on Twitter now.
Yeah. No, but why did we bring ad hominem back into this episode? And let's get into the meat of the discussion today.
We are going to pun on ad hominem, and we're going to talk about advertising, ad hominem, and marketing. And the cynical take on how marketing is all around us and what that is doing to us. So,
yeah,
take it away, Tony.
And the entry point, of course, is an actual ad which was targeted at one person for no reason at all.
I'm sure every one of you who are listening to this podcast have obviously come across this particular marketing campaign or this tweet or whatever. It was actually a newspaper ad that Bombay Shaving Company took out, right? And the context is this: the UP board exam results were announced recently, and there was this girl called Prachi. I forget her full name, Prachi, who topped the UP 10th standard boards. And she has a bit of facial hair, so her photograph was out in publications and everywhere. And there was a bunch of trolling that happened online, nasty trolling, as you would expect and imagine, unfortunately, in this world, which is par for course. But Bombay Shaving Company did this thing where they did what's known as moment marketing, where they try and ride the wave of a topical subject and try to weave in a marketing message around it to eventually sell their own product. So this was the ad that they took out. Dear Prachi, they're trolling your hair today. They'll applaud your air tomorrow. Air as in A.I.R, which is All India rank, which I now realize is also, an I rhyme, like hair and air. I didn't realize that this was coming up here, but there you go. And then there's a tagline at the bottom which says, we hope you never get bullied into using our razor. Right? So, yeah, this was the ad that they went out with. And there's been a lot of outrage about this ad because I think it's safe to say it's in very, I wouldn't say it's in poor taste, but it's an ad that is that targeted something, went in with an opportunistic.
Safe to say it is a blade ad.
It's a blade ad. Occam's razor says the brand is trying too hard to make a point. Rest assured, they have probably just tried to sell more razors in this case. But yeah, everything about this ad is wrong. And I must say one thing. Board exam results, 10th standard, 12th standard board exam results get announced, around the same time in the year, because that's when they come out and they make a little bit of news in the respective states where they're announced. They typically don't become national news, right? This particular girl's achievement, unfortunately, is only being spoken about because of something that does not have to do with the marks that she scored, right, in the biggest day of her life potentially. It's gone viral for a completely different reason. And I mean, we do realize, and we are also self-aware enough to say that we are also doing the same thing now. We are continuing to kind of fuel the conversation around this thing, because we are talking about Prachi underachievement as well, and we acknowledge that, and yeah, we move on, I guess. But since we're talking about 10th standard boards, right? I just wanted to take a moment, Tony. Do you remember the day your 10th standard board results came out, and how did you feel?
Ah, yeah, interesting. I mean, I want to say I remember, but I only remember the disappointment of one thing, which was like the subject that I used to score well in all throughout school was English, and that was the one subject in which I sort of like didn't score well enough in my 10th standard, right? But I mean, yeah, I mean, didn't matter at the end of the day. It was just one
Of
of those
course, it
things.
doesn't
Yeah,
matter. Yeah, none of these
yeah.
things matter. But yeah, so I vividly remember the day my 10th standard results came out, right? So we're going to go all the way back to the year 2000, which is when I passed my 10th standard. I was actually in Coimbatore at a cousin's place, my uncle's place, on the day when the results came out. These are obviously almost pre-internet days, but not entirely pre-internet, because I remember the results are actually out on a website, and you had to go and enter your roll number and check out your scores. And my sister, my cousin sister, who's 10 years older than me, she's the first person in the family who knew how to use the internet, how to use computers, etc. In fact, she actually took me and another cousin of mine out to a browsing center and taught us how to use the internet for the very first time.
Hmm.
We entered my roll number, whatever, and the scores came out. I remember being extremely tense because, as they tell you, 10th board exam is the most important thing, until the 12th board
Yeah.
exam comes, and then the 12th board exam is the most important thing, and then you just need to do 4 years of college. You do it well,
Yeah.
and then maybe you do a post graduation. If you crack that, then you're set in life. You get into a great job, as long as you crack a very good job and earn a good salary, and then you get your next promotion. And anyway, so I was very worried because this is right.
What a scam.
What a scam. I was very worried and concerned. A lot of tension in the air. I remember seeing the scores, right, when they came out. And the only thing I remember was, and this became famous in the family briefly as well, I managed to score 5 marks more than my brother did in his 10th standard, which was 4 years before
Oh,
that, right? He's 4 years older than
correct.
me. And
Mithun
until then,
partying too much clearly.
take that, Mithun Sundar. So right up to that point, right, and beyond as well, I was always like, this is Mithun's brother, right? I didn't even have an identity of my own, because my brother was this
Oh, okay.
trailblazer who was achieving so much, in school and
Correct.
wherever he went. So the expectation was always, will this guy even, come close to the lofty heights or the lofty standards set by his brother? And then in the 10th standard,
Nice.
I ended up with 5 marks more than him, right? And of course, entirely different scoring pattern, these things. It's like batting on a different pitch almost, because every year the number of marks they give out, everything, the scoring patterns change, right? I remember my brother was one of the toppers in school in his year,
Yeah.
and I was not one of the toppers in the same school, right? I was much lower down, because clearly everyone was getting more marks. It was just a more high scoring year, right? None of that really matters, because ultimately you only look at the number and all of that.
Talking.
But yeah, so what I'm trying to say is, the feeling that I had on that day, it was clearly the biggest achievement of my life until that point,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And it mattered a
Yeah,
lot to me. It is
yeah.
something that made me feel so happy, so proud about myself. And it's not
Yeah,
like I
yeah.
topped even my school, leave alone my state.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
sure in young Prachi's life, this again was definitely the biggest day of her life. It's such a
Yeah,
massive
yeah.
achievement. Her family must have been so
Correct.
proud of her.
I just want to underscore that, right? Like,
Yeah,
I think we just breezed past it, saying, we've passed all of these things. But I distinctly remember how tense and how anxious I was during my 10th standard, and how, it really felt like the most important moment in the life. And all
yeah,
of that. Yeah. So, I mean, I think as we grow older, we tend to trivialize this, saying, what is there, like this and all you'll do easily, right? But in the moment, it's definitely a huge, huge milestone achievement. Although it doesn't matter later, right? But yeah,
yeah.
for Prachi, obviously, it would have been like such a moment of pride.
Yeah, and it's sad that the media and later, brands like the Bombay Shaving Company have taken that moment, hijacked that moment, and
Mm.
and made it about something else altogether, and it's sad.
No, so much so that she basically said, "I wish I had scored 1 or 2 marks lower, right? So that my face wouldn't have been,
Oh, she actually said
plastered
that?
across social media." Yeah, she said that, and I wouldn't have had to, face this ignominy, right, for no reason at all. Yeah.
What a sad state of affairs, right? And this unfortunately will continue to dog her at least for a while. Hopefully, at some stage, this will pass on. But yeah, it's really sad what the Bombay Shaving Company did. I don't know what that marketing team was thinking when they put this out.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
well, glorious misfire. Let's just put it that way. And these keep happening now and then, even if you don't always have the worst intentions.
Yeah. I guess it is. What is the other razor? Hanlon's razor, which says don't ascribe to malice that which can be attributed to stupidity, right? Which I
Yes.
think is probably the case here.
Since we are talking about layers and peeling of layers with razors today, there are 3 razors we have spoken about already. Actually, 4. The first razor is, of course, Bombay Shaving Company, which sells razors. Then the ad put out by Bombay Shaving Company, which we are saying is a very Blade ad. And Blade, for people who are not from Tamil Nadu following this podcast, when you say Blade, which is something that people in Chennai will tell you a lot, or people from other parts of Tamil Nadu, what they really mean is your joke was so bad that it felt like a blunt blade or razor that you take and put against your skin. It sort of scabs you, it hurts you, right? So that is the origin of blade joke. That's where it comes from. So that's the second razor. Then we came up with Occam's razor, which states that very often, I mean, I'm just ad-libbing here, but the most obvious reason for something, the easiest answer, the most obvious reason for something is most likely the correct answer. So,
Yeah.
and then we have come to Hanlon's razor, which is that never attribute to malice what you can attribute to incompetence, in this case of the Bombay Shaving Company marketing team.
Yeah. Yeah.
There you go.
No, so one additional thing that I wanted to mention was that based on, I mean, we've been putting out a bunch of reels promoting leftover lasagna, right? And the whole intent was that to get your first 100 listeners is like a very, very hard task in this day and age. So you have to try everything, right? So we've done a few reels, but for the longest time, I have been extremely camera shy, right? Like, and growing up, I've always had this feeling that I am inadequate looks wise, right? I've gotten over it now, don't worry. But it took a long time, right? So, but still, some elements linger, right? So, like one of my ex bosses who's been like a really, really supportive guy and also a friend and all of that told me this is great content, but one tip to you. You do realize like you're sort of playing with your face all the time, right? And it's probably something that you should take note of. Which after he said that, I went back to it and I'm like, oh my god, what am I doing with my face, right? Which inadvertently tends to happen because you've sort of grown up not being convinced that you have a great face, right?
So you were saying, Tony, what was your Twitter bio? It was a verbal guy stuck in a visual
Instagram.
world. On Instagram, a verbal guy stuck in a visual world. So this journey of Tony Sebastian from a master of wordplay to a master of face play is where is what this world is being subject to now. But yeah, so you don't play with your face too much anymore. Yeah.
No, I do. This was just last week, right? But I've never been knowingly conscious of my face, right? For listeners who don't know, Nitin and I obviously share a lot of chemistry, even though we are in a long distance relationship, purely because we've done a bunch of these things elsewhere, right? There was this time where for another platform called Glance, we used to do a thrice a week show, right? And that had open comments, right? And I still, the only comment I remember from then, I think we did about maybe 20-25 episodes or something, right?
Yeah.
The only comment that I remember from then is someone basically saying nice teeth, and I'm like, it immediately sort of brought back so many traumatic memories from childhood, right? So yeah, I mean, you're never immune to this whole thing. So being what is it, a 15-16-year-old facing this can never be pleasant, right?
Since you mentioned Hanlon's razor, right? I don't know if this was a thing in your house or your father when he taught you to shave. never run the razor in
Oh,
the
shimmer against the
opposite
grain.
direction. Never run it against the
Correct.
grain because it'll make your skin rough or it'll make your beard
Yeah.
thicker or something. But what I'm going to do, why I brought that up, is I'm going to now run the handler's razor against the grain and say that I'm actually going to attribute a little bit of malice to what the
Okay.
Bombay Shaving Company
Let's go.
came out with.
Yeah.
Because this is not new, right? So the founder, CEO of Bombay Shaving Company is this person called Shantanu Deshpande, who, by the way, happens to be a
Okay.
friend of my brother's, right? I think they used to
Amazing.
work together at McKinsey. So, Mithun, you can pass this on to Shantanu if you want to. I'm sure he's seen a
Yeah.
lot of this anyway. So, there was this thing a few years back
Nitin,
where...
just one question. You're sure you're completely in fire mode, right? You never have to work again. Like, you're taking one company after the other.
burning all the bridges.
Leftover lasagna is basically the inverse of LinkedIn, where you're making sure that there is no place.
Hi,
you can
I'd like to
work
kick
ever.
you out of my professional network on leftover lasagna. Yeah.
Superb. Yeah, go.
Yeah. So no, but this one is well known, right? A few years back, Shantanu Deshpande had
Yeah.
tweeted something about hustle culture. Linking back to
Correct.
our previous episode. Let me try and
Yeah.
read out exactly what he said.
Yeah. I can't wait.
When you are 22 and new in your job, throw yourself into it. Eat well and stay fit, but put in the 18-hour days for at least 4 to 5 years, right? So this, of course, I mean, we know that there is this entire trope of hustle culture, and there's this Indian way of working where you're just basically available
Correct.
all the time for work, and especially if you're younger and junior, you're expected to be around even on weekends on WhatsApp now, and I think this really exploded during the pandemic, where people were really
Correct.
struggling to draw the border between work and life. Going back again to a previous episode, but Shantanu Deshpande put this out and got a lot of pushback on social media, etc. But what really came out of all of that was, I think a month or two later, Bombay Shaving Company came out with a sale called the 18-hour sale, where they sold all their products on discount for exactly 18 hours. So they actually took this opportunity and ran with it, which is fine. But nobody knew who Shantanu was until this particular incident made him a viral celebrity. And soon afterwards, he launched a podcast, right? It's called The Barber Shop. I mean, we keep promoting podcasts on this podcast. So The Barber Shop, where... The Barber Shop by Shantanu, where he interviews other founders, CEOs, purveyors of hustle culture, I would imagine. And I've actually listened to a couple of episodes, pretty good. But the reason I say that there is a little bit of malice here is ultimately all publicity is good publicity. It's not a bad way to go about marketing.
Yeah.
And given that Bombay Shaving Company and Shantanu have been in the firing line months before, for them to... I would imagine that their PR team would be that much more careful. Their marketing team would be that much more careful about what they put out.
So you're
And yet you see
essentially
this,
saying what we've been doing so far, Nitin, to gain listeners is try to mention their names on the podcast. So we mentioned Vikas, Vamu, all of these people have started listening to our podcast because we tell them that you are mentioned in this podcast. Now what you're doing is layering up, saying, can we mention entire corporations? Can we get the entirety of Bombay Shaving Company's PR, HR, marketing, and Shantanu Deshpande himself to listen to this podcast? So we are basically hacking that growth metric by about 20-25%.
Hustle, bro. We are working 18 hours a day to make this podcast viral. Come on.
The best tweet about hustle culture was this guy who said, I think hopefully jokingly, is that I believe in my hustle so much that I asked my landlord to increase my rent.
That's a good one.
This whole thing in marketing where this is even considered to be something logical that you want to do. I believe all of this actually traces back to the starting point of marketing itself, where there was no necessarily a direct link between marketing and profits or revenue, right? There's a very famous quote attributed to many people, but I believe the original person is John Wanamaker, who said, half the money I spend on advertising is wasted. The trouble is I don't know which half, right? And therefore, at that same time, there was this whole thing where science communication is not what it used to be now. Now you have obviously a bunch of great science communicators on Twitter, on podcasts, whether it's Infinite Monkey Cage or Radiolab, which we keep going back to, or even Freakonomics for that matter, right? Like just getting economics out there. Like there are so many outlets. But back then it was all an esoteric sort of thing under academia, right? Wherein science was left to scientists, and the only sort of place where it be communicated would be peer-reviewed journals. Otherwise, it wouldn't carry weight at all. Which meant that the volume of science communication was very low because peer review process takes a lot of time, and there is a particular kind of language to it and limited distribution, which meant that it was never accessible by the common public, right? And marketing sort of stepped into this domain, right? Because you obviously can't justify your existence based on performance. The obvious vacuum to fill was to try and sound scientific. I think the best example of this is from probably the 1950s. Basically, this was around subliminal priming. Okay, his name is James Vickery, right? And you can just probably Google James Vickery Snopes, and you should find the article that we are referring to, right? And his example was that during a theater screening of a movie, he basically flashed messages to get people to eat more popcorn and drink more Coke, right? And this is called subliminal advertising or subliminal priming or one of those things. Except this was in 1957, right? And obviously, like no one's able to verify this, etc., etc. When they challenged him to verify it later, you found that this was not replicable at all. Right? So the whole point was that you want to make it sound more esoteric than it is, make it sound scientific to say there is a slight possibility that this could happen, therefore it has happened, right? Same thing with a bunch of other things like like getting people to what is that there's this whole thing about how multiple bands music bands, if you back mask them, have hidden messages and all of that bullshit. But I think it's basically that scientific communication was at a different point. Marketing filled that void primarily because performance didn't used to be there, and these are just the final embers of that playing out, right?
Not even the final embers, right? Like this is always going to be the case, I feel, unfortunately, because by and large, even now, while a lot of us are much more aware and have access to better information and don't necessarily fall for every marketing message or any message that comes out, that's not true for majority of the people, right? People are still largely shaped by the lowest common denominator of message that reaches them. To put it quite bluntly, even a simple thing like in the last 5 or 6 years, we've come to realize that fat is not bad or not as bad as we thought it was. And sugar is the real villain in our diets. It's one of the things that shocks me every single day, that it took so many years for this to even come out, right? Because that's the kind of amount of money and creativity that the sugar lobby and companies like Kellogg, for instance, put into creating this entire this entire strain of thought that fat is the villain and that sugar is not bad for you. Sugar is the biggest villain, and fat is a high fat, low sugar diet is actually far more beneficial to you than the other way around.
But actually this is the nuance that will probably get us to the next layer, right? The reason why this is popular was not because of scientific studies, which we later realized was funded by sugar lobbies, right? Which in itself is disgraceful. That's not science at all. When you basically have a funder trying to get out the results that they want to based on like spurious research. But the reason why it has taken hold of in popular culture is that you employed marketing and advertising to make sure that scientific studies is the backing, right? Like 9 out of 10 dentists recommend Pepsodent or any other brand or whatever, right? One of those things. The basic point is that we should trust science, right? However, it is not the same as saying that all marketing should be trusted, right? I think this goes back to the original thing which you had mentioned in our pilot episode, which we keep going back to, is that humans cannot digest large numbers or facts or any of these things, right? We need to be fed simple stories, right? Even going back to the last episode when we spoke about how probably it is beneficial for companies and individuals to focus on incremental changes and not necessarily large stories. Those are not easily explained. I think one of the things that you hear first in your sort of early marketing class is about the genius of the guy who increased the diameter of the
Of the
orifice
toothpaste.
of Colgate toothpaste, and apparently people spread their toothbrush from end to end. As a person who, let me assure you, brushes his teeth every day.
You have nice teeth, as our dear listeners have
possessing
said.
large teeth. Let me tell you, I don't think anyone does this. Do you? Like, do you spread toothpaste end to end?
No, probably not. But I still do believe that there might be a grain of truth to that story, because even if you don't do it end to end, you're probably still doing the same distance, right? People measure out toothpaste by distance, and the distance, your mileage may vary, but people probably don't focus so much on the thickness of the turd that they're
not the volume. It's about the length. Okay, cool. Yeah, maybe. But anyway, it's still a bullshit way to approach marketing or science or any of these things. So the point being that science communication, therefore, is screwed. Why? Because like most of where you get science from is going to be the media, and they have a incentive to make sure that the headline catches your eye, right?
Exactly.
And the only way they can do it is by a negative framing as opposed to a positive framing.
Nothing sells like outrage.
How many people has Covishield killed in the last week that we've discovered?
Right into the topic. In fact, Tony, you should talk about this, because I think you put out a very nice series of stories on Instagram and I think on Twitter as well about this topic. So, Covishield, of course, has been in the news recently. It is the AstraZeneca variant of the COVID vaccine that was available in India. Famously, there was another vaccine that was available in India, which was launched by Bharat Biotech, which had the blessings of the Indian government, I believe, which was called Covaxin. Both these vaccines eventually, I think, saved millions of lives. And eventually, when India got their vaccines, is when things started to come back under control, and around the world, to be honest, right? But there is some new news around the Covishield vaccine, because AstraZeneca actually put out something or said something. So why don't you tell us what exactly happened, Tony?
This goes back to why we need to attempt to look at everything from first principles, right? I think on episode 5, when we were talking about how much of the things that we've taught have we questioned, Nitin, you had mentioned that once you start questioning one or two big structures, it is easy to question the others as well, right? But quite often, given that we live in a social media era, you're not looking to fact check every little thing that comes your way, especially if it has a backing in terms of what your pre-held notion of a situation is, right? To not mince words, India, much like many other countries, mishandled the COVID situation very, very badly, right? The only problem is that there is almost no consensus on who has managed COVID well, right? For instance, arguably, in my view, again, Kerala managed COVID very well in terms of limiting loss of life, right? But what happened as a result was that the informal economy that existed in Kerala was almost completely wiped out, right? So you had lives but no livelihoods, right? But whereas India on the whole just thought that we'll just stop counting, right? And repeat that narrative. So broadly, if you're sort of consuming this podcast, you're probably liberal in your outlook, and you accept that India handled COVID badly. The next sort of thing that would happen when you read this headline saying that AstraZeneca admits that its vaccine had a problem is that we were forced into taking the vaccine, and actually this is a terrible thing that has happened. Whereas this is where we need to go back to the elementals and look into the actual study and the actual data, right? As opposed to the headline which is put out by the newspaper. Right? So there is this oft-repeated thing called gel man amnesia.
So the gel man amnesia is when we read the newspaper, right? We typically tend to be subject matter experts, let's say in one or two things, but not in everything, right? In my case, I would say I probably knew a little bit more about cricket than the average person out there, right? I wouldn't claim to be an expert. So when I
think
watch,
you've retired from cricket now.
yeah. So you read every part of the newspaper, assuming that the person writing it was an expert and knows the ins and outs of what he or she is talking about, right? And then you come to that topic that you actually know a lot about. In my case, let's say cricket, and you read a certain opinion piece, or you read a certain piece of analysis, and you're like, hang on, that analysis is actually quite shallow and doesn't make sense for XYZ reason. Now, gentlemen, amnesia is when you come across a moment like that, and then you wonder, okay, I read all the other stuff that was in this newspaper about economics, about policies, about politics, about administration, etc., entertainment, and I believed all of them. What's to say that the level of expertise involved in each one of those was as shallow or as lacking in depth as it was for cricket? So that is gentlemen amnesia.
Right? So, I mean, that is one part. So, which means like when you read the newspaper, you're like, it's authentic. So, we have to. And everyone's reported this, right? Including whoever you think is like the nuanced purveyor of news, whether it's Faye D'Souza or someone else. Everyone's reported this without sort of looking at it. And this is a common trope. The other problem that exists is that humans are terrible at understanding huge numbers. Like, we've never been. Back to the hunter-gatherer era, the maximum number you had to think of was probably a tribe size, which was around 100 or 150. Humans are not capable of processing large numbers, right?
Yeah.
So if you say, 100 million versus 100 billion, you think they're pretty close, right? Till you think about it. And the one fact that, which, blew my mind the first time I heard it, is that 1 million seconds is like 12 days, right? Whereas 1 billion seconds is 32 years, right? And if you sort of match that to your lifespan, you can see how much difference there is. But when you're told 100 million was 100 billion, your brain can't obviously comprehend it, right? That's how humans have been built. The other problem is that we are really bad at understanding risk, right? So this again comes from an unnumbered podcast, Chaos. Infinite Monkey Cage. The episode is called Risk, and it was released on 18th November 2013. Right.
Okay.
So they've basically said there's a newspaper headline which talks about eating a daily fry up for breakfast boosts your cancer risk by 20%.
Yeah.
Right. Which means like if you have a bacon sandwich or whatever for breakfast, your risk of cancer is increased by 20%. Right? Now this sounds scary.
Yes.
Like obviously no one's going to eat it.
Yeah.
Right? Except when you dig into the whole thing, it is about a specific type of cancer which is called pancreatic cancer. Right? So the chance of this happening is 1 in 80 people. So if you take 400 people, 5 out of 400 will get it.
Any 5 out of any 400, even if they're having the healthiest breakfast, Kellogg's cornflakes loaded with sugar, which is good for
whatever.
you.
Whatever.
Yeah.
Intermittent fasting, whatever. Keto diet.
Yeah.
Anything. Genetic proclivity to pancreatic cancer statistically is 5 people out of 400.
Yeah.
Now let us say all these 500 people for their entire lives, let's say 30 years, 50 years, whatever, eat this bacon sandwich for breakfast every day.
Yeah.
This 20% basically means that instead of 5 out of 400, now 6 out of 400 will get pancreatic cancer.
Yeah.
This is what the newspaper has framed as eating fry up for breakfast increases cancer by 20%. Right?
Yeah.
But if reported the other way, it is a non-story, right? Like no one will bother reading it. So in a similar vein, this whole Covishield story is basically that the risk of this thing happening is very, very rare, right? It's the same risk as you getting struck by lightning or something like that, right? So however you want to put it in numbers, is that it is either 1 in 100,000 or 4 per million, depending on how you read the numbers, and you can look into the study. As opposed to if you were to get affected with COVID, it was probably 1 in 4 or 1 in 2. Right?
Yeah.
And you don't understand this risk as should you take the vaccine or not, right? And that is a major problem. So take the basic moral of the story is like take science from science communicators, right? Whether it's Liverdoc or our friend Sandhya Ramesh, who has actually tweeted it less controversially, in fact. So maybe that.
Yeah, and more importantly, just question everything that's put out to you, right? Don't fall for the headline, because that's what they want you to do. They want you to see the headline, they want you to click on it,
Correct.
read the strapline, maybe outrage and share it with 100 other people, because that's
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
works for them. They probably don't even, the people who
Yeah.
are trying to do this to you probably don't even have the details in their article. So find the right
Yeah.
sources that you are reading to or listening to,
Yeah.
and ask your friends, have you listened to
And
Leftover
it's
Lasagna? It's a good
note to
source.
self only. No, and it's note to self only, right? Because we also do this. I think,
Yeah.
I mean, what neither you nor me did was when the first headline came out, we didn't, as a knee jerk, tweet it out to our groups, right?
Yeah.
But when we came across this tweet from Liver Doc and
Yeah.
Sandy Grains, I think you mentioned that, I was waiting for a
Yeah.
more nuanced take on this before.
Yeah, exactly. Because I don't know where to go and look for it. I knew that obviously this was uh, being blown out of proportion. I was waiting for some sane voice to come and explain what exactly is going on. But yeah, there you go.
Yeah. In the process of doing some basic research for this, I came across a fascinating thing called the nocebo effect.
Yeah.
Nocebo, right? Yeah, it's basically the opposite of placebo effect, right? Placebo effect is basically where if you think something's going to help you and you take it, it ends up helping you, right?
Yeah.
Nocebo effect is the opposite, where if you think something's going to harm you, and even though it doesn't cause any harm, it will harm you, right? The best example of this is the villainization of the yummiest, most delicious thing that humans have discovered, which is
Parota.
MSG, right? Monosodium.
MSG, okay.
Monosodium glutamate,
Oh,
which
yes.
basically, again, blame science, bad science for this. I think termed the Chinese restaurant syndrome.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And some random comment in some medical journal got blown out of proportion. And I'm
Yeah.
sure growing up, we've all heard
Yes.
that MSG causes cancer or one of those things, whereas it does nothing of the sort, right? It
Yeah.
is delicious and healthy.
It's a standard addition to everything that
Yeah,
I cook,
brilliant.
by the way. It's my favorite salt. More than common salt. It's the uncommon salt.
Kuri paniyaram with half teaspoon ghee and 1 teaspoon MSG. This is Nitin
Yes.
Sundar.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So the nocebo. So I mean, the basic thing is that once your brain has been attuned to one fact, it becomes extremely hard to question it so much so that you get a physical response, right? If you
Yeah.
believe that MSG is going to cause you harm, and you actually consume a meal which has MSG in it, or it doesn't have MSG in it, but you're told that it has MSG in it, you will start showing signs of whatever it is that you believe it causes,
Yeah.
which is crazy.
Yeah, indeed.
There was this other interesting phenomenon which happened in the US, I think last month, which was what is called a total eclipse, right?
Yeah.
And what ended up happening as a result of the total eclipse was that the entire thing didn't go dark, right? But you were probably
Yeah.
left with about 5% of the light that you normally have during sunlight, but people could
Yeah.
still see everything, right?
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is that your brain doesn't comprehend that it has become 95% less dark, or whatever that number is. I'm just, again, this is not accurate numbers, I'm just going by it. Because even in a indoor room, when you have lighting, the lighting is not at all comparable to what sunlight generates, right?
Yes.
And the eye has a different mechanism to process this light, right?
Yeah.
But you broadly think of both as light.
Yeah.
The reason I'm saying this is that when this whole Covishield or AstraZeneca thing came out, people started comparing it to the whole what is it, Everest masala and Patanjali thing, as
Yeah.
if they are the same,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because you're processing it exactly similarly. And I think that is an important distinction that we need to draw to say what actual discrediting looks like, as opposed to broadly, headlines for both might be the same, right?
Yeah.
But I believe there
Yeah,
is
the
a
headline
difference
is
of maybe
standards are lax, and in India, and whatever big pharma is out to get you, or the big, they're trying to fool you into consuming stuff that is bad for you. It's the common headline that is just thrown out
correct,
there. Yeah.
correct. And I believe it is, I think this eclipse analogy, at least in my mind, works well to say even if it is 5% light versus 95% light, they're not the same, right? Even
Yeah.
if your headlines or your brains are telling you that it is analogs. Yeah.
Again, another tangent on the 95% versus 100% illumination or darkness thing, and why they might seem so different to our minds, while they're actually seem like they're fairly close. The human mind actually processes things not on a linear scale but on a logarithmic scale. And I think we've probably spoken about this. If not, again, there is yet another Radio Lab episode which talks in detail about this.
Yeah.
Right?
Is it that we process it at log, or nature is in log and we process it linearly?
Nature is in log, and naturally we process in log, but we've converted everything into the linear frame, which is not actually how it should be. So when you take young kids, I don't remember the exact research, and I'm sure I'm simplifying this, but young kids tend to think that 3 is closer to the middle of 1 and 10 than 5 is. Right.
So the thing was, if you give them a space to put the numbers 1 to 10,
yes,
they don't put every number like in the same distance.
Yeah.
Right? So probably 3 is at the middle, and then there's a difference.
Well, this is very true. Like, I have an 8-year-old son, and he's obviously now slowly learning to write properly and everything with a lot of coaxing. I often see that he starts off a sentence and, it's a huge couple of words, and then suddenly he's run out of space. So you see that the concentration of words keeps increasing as you go to the end of the sentence. It's all natural, right? Unfortunately. Yeah.
I think this is true of even like music instruments, right? Guitar, frets or something like that, where not everything's linear. Yeah.
And if you take the grand piano, right, there's this huge thing behind the piano, which it's not linear. It's and we'll put the picture to show you.
I think it's the same thing with decibel scales. Also, the Richter scale, which is used to measure earthquakes, and there is a similar scale which is used to measure how potent a volcano is. Right? So, on a Richter scale, a 5 and a 6 are not the same as the difference between a 4 and a 5. Right? There's a significant difference here, which you don't intuitively grasp because all of the math that we process is in a linear fashion, basically.
Yeah. So, since this episode is about marketing, right, very, very lateral connect to this whole discussion. Again, from the book that I mentioned last week, right, When We Cease to Understand Our World. I just finished reading that book. It's a fantastic book. Labatut, Benjamin Labatut. I'll recommend it once again. But one of the latter chapters on that book is about Schrodinger, the famous scientist Schrodinger, right? So around the time all of this came around between the world wars, when our understanding of physics and quantum physics, really, human beings, the great scientists, came up with a grammar to try and understand what quantum physics is and how stuff happens inside atoms, right, and understanding electrons, etc. There was a huge rift between the classical physicists and the quantum physicists, because the quantum guys actually had this theory that everything that we know from classical physics is not going to help us to understand what happens at subatomic levels, right? Schrodinger, we all know what Schrodinger is famous for, right? So can you tell us, what is Schrodinger famous for? What is he known for?
The Schrodinger's cat experiment, basically, that the cat is both alive and dead till you open the box, right?
Till you open the box and observe it. Yeah, so the cat is inside a box, and there is a cyanide vial inside the box which is triggered, and there is one stray electron or photon or something that's let into the box. Now when the box is closed, you have no way of saying whether that subatomic particle has actually decayed. If it has decayed, then the cyanide vial has been broken, and if the cyanide vial is broken, then the cat has been poisoned and the cat is dead. But until you open it, you have no way of knowing whether all of this has happened, though you would imagine that it would have happened. So the theory that Schrodinger put forth was that the cat is both alive and dead until you actually open the box and measure it. So the funda of quantum physics is things only exist because they get measured, right? Which, by the way, goes back to, I tweeted about this yesterday. There's a product management Gyan meets quantum physics. What gets measured, what matters gets measured over. What doesn't get measured does not matter. I don't know what exactly they say, some rubbish. And so they come up with idiotic things to track.
What gets measured gets done, right? But then there is another law, I forget the name, which basically says the moment you start measuring something, it ceases to become a relevant measure.
Exactly.
Because everyone will
come up with metrics that are convenient to measure, right? And I think, I think the consumer tech startup space in India over the last 15 years has greatly benefited from this, because they came up with their own fancy metrics, which they were able to sell to Tiger and all the other VCs who came and lavished a lot of money. And now finally, these companies are all trying to get profitable. But that's it. The reason I bring up this whole Schrodinger story is that Schrodinger, by the way, was not arguing on behalf of quantum physics when he came up with this theory. what he did,
Hmm.
and since we are talking about ad hominem, he came up with reductio ad absurdum, which is where you reduce something to its most absurd level to try and discredit an argument, right? So
Right.
there were these quantum physicists like Heisenberg and Niels Bohr, who were coming and saying all these, highfalutin ideas, like you can't measure the position and the velocity of an atom at the same time. Things exist in a cloud. You cannot really say where they are or how they will travel from one spot to another. Schrodinger actually was a classical physicist who then said, what kind of rubbish is all this? It's almost as if you guys are saying, if I had a cat inside a box with, cyanide and whatever, a stray subatomic particle inside, you cannot say whether the cat is alive or dead, right? And he thought everybody will say, yeah, obviously this makes no sense. Except they turned around and said, you're absolutely right. That's exactly what we are saying. And unfortunately, Schrodinger came to be associated with this ridiculous fallacy that he created in order to discredit something, right? And now he is known, as the Schrodinger's cats guy. So it's a typical example of an advertising message which backfires completely,
Insane.
and you end up becoming famous for something that you actually don't stand for, right?
So that law was basically Goodhart's law, which says when a measure becomes a target, it ceases
Yeah.
to be a good measure. Right, but just to ease Schrodinger's pain and also probably end on a lighter note, my favorite paradox involving a cat is not Schrodinger's cat, but it is called the buttered cat paradox. Have you heard of this?
No, I haven't.
It's basically a fun thing, right? That cat, if a cat is thrown from wherever, it will always land on its feet.
Yeah.
Right? Then there is a Murphy's law, which says that if you have a piece of buttered toast, it will always fall down the buttered side first.
Ah.
Now, what happens if you tie a buttered toast to the back of a cat such that the buttered side is facing up in the opposite direction of the cat's legs,
Yeah.
and you throw the cat down, right? And so the basic conclusion is that it will stop, it will fall, free fall, and stop like 5 centimeters above the ground, at which point it will start rotating because the buttered side has to fall first, but also the cat's feet have to fall first. So it attains sort of an
So
equilibrium.
it basically will
It
never
is
land.
twisting all the time. Yeah,
So
it'll never
it's
land.
continuing to spin. Interesting. Yeah, this is actually a proper duality.
Yeah.
This is exactly what this is like Schrodinger's cat taken to power X, right? It's both, it's falling and it's not falling at the same time, right? Very interesting.
Yeah.
No, but
Buttered cat paradox.
since we spoke about marketing, and one of the things I never understand about you, Tony, I mentioned it to you on WhatsApp a few days back. For someone who claims to be a marketing guy who is creative and everything, you have not watched Mad Men, which is one of the greatest, probably the greatest television show ever made, and is also set up in the
Yeah.
world of marketing and advertising. And by the way, is also a show that is much more than that. Like I keep telling people, it is not
Yeah.
a show about advertising or about advertisers. It's a show about
Yeah.
the human condition, really. There is this wonderful sequence in Mad Men where the protagonist, played by John Hamm, who's Don Draper, has to pitch to Kodak, right? So Kodak has come to the company for with a marketing requirement. They need to sell this new camera contraption that they've come up with, which they call the wheel, right? It's actually a round kind of contraption in
Yeah.
which you can put films, right? Like various photographic films, and there's a projector attached to it. And once you've loaded it up with films and you turn it on, the wheel starts rotating, and you can basically see a Rolodex of images, one after the other, right? And you can sit as a group and watch it, since it has a projector, so you can project it and watch it. This, obviously, Mad Men is set in the 60s, so this was a revolutionary
Yeah.
new invention in the 60s, right? So this was the product for which they had come to Don Draper's company for a pitch. Don Draper is the protagonist of the show, and he's a very, very complex human being, someone who is struggling with what he feels about the world, his feelings for his family, his wife, his kids, and is generally someone who's trying to run away from the shackles of life to try and lead a very individualistic sort of take on what life is. Also happens to be a creative genius, right? He's the person who comes up with the campaigns all the time. And then he makes a pitch to Kodak, which maybe we'll put some of those clips in the podcast, where he comes out with a pitch that is all heart, right? For a person who famously is
Right.
not about the heart, he actually comes and pitches with actual images of himself and his family that he places in the wheel. And then he eventually doesn't call it a wheel, right? And he calls it a carousel. And he says this, and the reason they actually want him to incorporate wheel into the marketing, because the wheel was the original invention, and hence they want this to show that, as something scientific and modern. Except they're also worried because the wheel is still an ancient science. It's not really cool anymore to talk about the wheel as something that was revolutionary. But he then turns it on its head and says this is actually not a machine that takes you from one place to another. It is a time machine, because it's a carousel that takes you to your past. It takes you to nostalgic
Amazing.
moments, and that it's I don't know why I'm making a pitch for Mad Men,
No.
but since this is about marketing, I'm
One second.
marketing Mad Men to you.
Can I just say? No. Can I just say? Basically, he should have ended up when he's talking about a carousel and a time machine and all that. The tagline should have been "Kal carousel, aaj carousel ab."
Can you explain what that means?
You have never heard this?
No.
Okay, wait. It's a Doha or something like that. Not from Qatar,
Qatar.
but the other one, right?
Yeah.
But okay, Google is showing it to me in Hindi. Let me see it in
I can read Hindi, man.
English.
This is like very insulting.
No, I can't. I can't find the whole thing. Right? Okay.
You can't
basically-
read Hindi. What a loser. Wow.
No, they've only put the first one, right? There are two lines to this. Okay, basically, okay, one second. I think I should be able to find this somewhere. Yeah.
Send me the link. I'll read it for you in Hindi, and then you can explain it back to me.
That's not the whole. The point is not okay.
But the joke is this, which our listeners should take a moment to appreciate this. So,
okay, wait.
No, one sec. Before we go there, Tony grew up in Kerala, right? Which, by the way, obviously Malayalam is the main language that people use, but Kerala has embraced Hindi, right? And I think Hindi is actually taught in schools, so people or is also used. Like there are very few people you would encounter in Kerala who actually can't speak Hindi. I grew up in Chennai, in Tamil Nadu, where Hindi is obviously anathema almost. So I learned Hindi for 3 years as my third language, which was something that you have in CBSE from classes 5 to 8. So I learned the alphabet and I learned how to read, but my understanding of some of the words and my vocabulary is not great, but I can read Hindi. So between us, we have a person who understands Hindi but cannot read it, and a person who can read Hindi but not understand it. And we're like those, those two blind men. One person is blind, one person is deaf, and we need to cross the road. That's you and me.
Okay, anyway. For your this thing, okay, it says "Kal kare so aaj kare so ab, pal mein parle hoegi, bahuri karega kab."
Parle hoegi.
Bahuri karega kab. This is left as an exercise for our listeners. Basically, it means to say, if you can do it tomorrow, do it today, and if you can do it today, do it now, right? It basically means there is no time like the present, which would have been brilliant for his time machine / camera or whatever.
Absolutely.
Which is
also because the
Aaj carousel ab, that is what I was going for.
Exactly.
Thank you for making me explain this.
So the original Doha is Kal karo so aaj kar. We have changed it to Kal karo sell aaj kar, which is a perfect tagline not for advertisers but for salespeople. What you need to sell tomorrow, you sell that today. Kal karo sell aaj kar. Maybe we are teasing our next episode is going to be about sales. Right? We're doing the entire all functions of a corporate one after the other. Our episode on finance is going to be a lot of fun when we get there.
Amazing. Yeah, I think that's the logical endpoint of episode 8 of Leftover Lasagne.
Yeah, and we wish a lot of luck and happiness to Prachi, and hopefully, wonderful things in what lies ahead for her, and for everyone else who has taken their board exams and who have got good marks, bad marks, average marks. Feel happy if they're good. Don't be too fussed if they're bad. There is a lot more to life.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Like podcasts.
Yeah, if you like it, leave a 5-star review. If you don't like it, it's okay. There are other things you can do with your life than give us a 1-star review. So yeah, take it easy.
All right. Thank you for tuning in. Until next week, this is Tony and Nitin saying bye. Bye bye.
Bye bye.